What would you do if you were stopped from boarding first class? Not because your ticket was invalid, but because of the color of your skin. What if the airline staff looked right through you as if your presence somehow didn't belong, even though you were one of the most powerful CEOs in the country? This is not just a story about one man being denied a seat. It's a story about how silence speaks, how dignity resists, and how a single phone call brought an entire airline industry to its knees. But who was Isaiah Benton? And why did his calm voice shake the foundation of an empire built on quiet discrimination? What happened on Flight 327? And how did it lead to a summit that changed everything? You're about to hear the full story layer by layer, seat by seat, moment by moment. If you believe in justice, in quiet strength, and in the power of standing your ground, then this story is for you. So make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because what happens next will stay with you long after the plane lands. Now, let's begin. The boarding gate at Concourse D buzzed with that distinct blend of chatter, rustling carry-ons, and the occasional polite announcement over the PA. Gate 23A was preparing its final boarding call for Flight 707 to San Francisco, and the line had thinned to just a few stragglers. Isaiah Benton stepped forward with quiet certainty. He moved with the unbothered calm of someone who had boarded hundreds of planes before, yet carried the posture of a man who noticed every detail: the furrowed brow of the gate agent, the narrowed glance of the passenger in front of him turning to size him up. He handed over his boarding pass and ID without a word. The gate agent, a young man barely in his 20s, scanned it. A small flicker of hesitation crossed his face before he smiled awkwardly and gestured toward the jet bridge. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Benton," he said, voice clipped. Isaiah gave a brief nod and moved on. He wore a navy quarter zip, dark jeans, and soft brown leather sneakers. No suit, no Rolex, nothing flashy. And that, in his experience, was often a problem. The plane was one of those newer models, quiet, sleek, cool-toned LED lighting lining the aisle. He made his way toward the front cabin, where plush seats curved into private nooks, each one with its own pod. 1A, that was his. He stowed his small carry-on above, adjusted the headrest, and lowered himself into the seat. He took out a slim paperback from his jacket, the kind of book with worn pages and underlined quotes. His eyes scanned the first line, but he didn't make it to the second before he heard it. "Excuse me." Sir A voice. Too loud for the quiet of first class. Too sharp. It came from a middle-aged white man with a name tag clipped to his blazer. Brent Radley, flight supervisor. He had that stiff airline posture, arms folded, chin slightly forward, like he was used to having the final word. "Yes," Isaiah said without moving from his seat. Brent leaned slightly closer, just enough to make the conversation feel public. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This section is reserved for first-class passengers only." Isaiah blinked slowly. "I am a first-class passenger." Brent's lips parted in a small, polite smile, the kind that wasn't meant to be kind at all. "If you just show me your boarding pass, we can clear this up." Isaiah reached calmly into his jacket and handed it over. Brent scanned it, then scanned it again. The seat number, 1A, was printed clearly in bold black ink. Brent's smile faltered. "Thank you," Isaiah said quietly, extending his hand to take it back. Brent hesitated. "Sir, can I ask how you purchased this ticket?" Isaiah met his eyes. His voice didn't rise. It never did. "I used my business account." Why Brent opened his mouth as if to say something else, but then simply shook his head. "One moment, please," he muttered, stepping back. Isaiah sat still. The cabin was silent now. A few rows back, a woman peeked over the rim of her glasses. A suited man 2 seats away shifted uncomfortably. No one said anything, but the energy had shifted. It always did. He remembered what Grace used to say. They don't need to shout. Isaiah, disrespect can whisper. He closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. He had a meeting in San Francisco in 8 hours with the Department of Defense about cybersecurity infrastructure. He was tired. He wasn't here to prove a point. And yet the point kept finding him. Brent returned a minute later with a flight attendant in tow. A younger woman, clearly unsure why she had been summoned. "Mr. Benton," Brent said, using his name now like it was a tool, not a courtesy. "Unfortunately, due to security protocols, I'll need to ask you to step off the aircraft briefly while we verify some information." Isaiah didn't move. "You've already verified my boarding pass. It's just procedure, sir." "It's not," Isaiah replied. "It's perception." Brent flushed slightly. The younger flight attendant glanced between the 2 men and shifted uncomfortably. She had clearly seen this scene before, just with different characters. From across the aisle, someone tapped their phone screen. Filming had begun. Isaiah's gaze flicked to the window for a brief moment. His reflection stared back calm, restrained, but with a storm beginning just beneath the surface. He wanted to say nothing, to comply, to make it to San Francisco and get on with his day. But silence had a cost. Grace had warned him. One day, it won't be just about you anymore. One day, the way they treat you, it'll be about the next you. And the next. Isaiah unbuckled his seatbelt. Slowly, deliberately. He stood. "I'll step off the aircraft," he said softly. "Once your airline steps into accountability." Brent blinked, clearly confused. Isaiah reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "One number, one call." The message wasn't long. "Nina," he said into the receiver, "activate lockdown protocol on all scheduled flight systems under Orion's contract. Start with this one, authorization Benton Sigma." A pause. "Yes," he added, "nationwide." And with that, he sat back down, not defiant, not smug, just steady, like a man who had simply grown tired of shrinking. Outside, the last light of day reflected off the plane's wing. Inside, the energy shifted again. This time, it trembled. The silence that followed Isaiah's phone call was deafening, not just inside the cabin, but in the air itself. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. Brent Radley still stood in the aisle, lips parted slightly, trying to decipher what had just happened. The younger flight attendant took a step back, eyes darting between the passengers and her supervisor, uncertain if she should act or wait. Isaiah didn't say another word. He simply placed his phone face down on the armrest, leaned back into the leather seat, and returned to the page he never had a chance to finish reading earlier. His hands didn't shake. His eyes didn't wander. But his mind, the part no one could see, was working overtime. He wasn't a man who liked conflict. Never had been. In another life, he would have gotten up, walked off the plane, and sent a strongly worded email. Let the PR team sort it out. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the look in Brent's eyes, not hatred, not overt aggression, but that quiet disbelief that someone like Isaiah could belong in a seat like 1A. That assumption, that entitlement, or maybe it was the 2 black teenagers he saw boarding earlier, heading to the back in economy, wearing hoodies with earbuds in, not realizing someone was watching to see what kind of man they might grow into. Isaiah had spent a lifetime learning how to soften his voice so it didn't sound threatening, how to dress down his success, how to smile through closed doors. He had bent so many times he was beginning to forget what standing tall felt like. But this time, he hadn't bent. His father would have been surprised. His foster mother, Grace, wouldn't. You didn't raise your voice, baby. You just reminded them who they were talking to. A sudden flicker of overhead lights made a few passengers glance up. Then the intercom beeped softly, followed by the voice of the captain, level and calm. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a brief technical delay. Please remain seated while we coordinate with ground control. The same announcement repeated in Spanish. Isaiah looked up. Brief. He knew better. This wasn't brief. This was the start of the cascade. In a control room 3 states away, Nina Carter sat in a darkened office, her screen lit with security protocols. One glance told her what she needed to know. Every gate connected to Orion's cybersecurity infrastructure across 5 major airports had just begun to lock into a diagnostic cycle. Planes wouldn't take off. Boarding bridges wouldn't respond. No boarding passes could be verified. It was legal, contractual, and activated under emergency override. She didn't panic. Nina never panicked. She simply leaned back and whispered to herself, "Here we go. Back on the plane." Brent had stepped into the galley and was speaking in hushed tones on his radio. Passengers were beginning to fidget. A child in row 3 squirmed, and a woman sighed heavily as she clutched her laptop bag tighter. A man from 1C leaned across the aisle. "Is everything all right?" Sir Isaiah looked at him. Middle-aged, well-dressed, polite. The kind of man who was used to voicing concern when things felt out of place. "I'm fine," Isaiah said, "just waiting for the system to catch up." The man nodded, but his eyes lingered. Not in judgment, in curiosity. Isaiah knew that look, too. It was the look of a man trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't yet realized had more pieces than he could see. Suddenly, someone else moved. A woman in row 2, young Latina, maybe late 20s, stood up, holding her phone. "Excuse me," she said, directing her words toward Brent, who had returned. "I recorded part of your conversation earlier. You told him to leave the plane even after seeing his boarding pass. I think people need to see how that's being handled." Brent's face turned crimson. "That's not necessary, miss," he said tightly. The woman raised her eyebrows. "Seems necessary to me." She sat back down. Her name was Ava Dominguez. She didn't work in media. She didn't have 1 million followers. But she had something more important, a conscience. She didn't know who Isaiah Benton was, not yet. But she knew what it felt like to be made invisible. And she wasn't about to let it happen quietly. Isaiah met her eyes and gave a small nod of gratitude. She returned it with a smile, subtle but solid. A ripple had begun. Isaiah leaned his head back again. And for the first time in weeks, his mind went somewhere it rarely allowed itself to go home. Not the condo in D.C. or the townhouse in Palo Alto. No. Home was a 1-bedroom apartment in St. Louis with plastic on the windows to keep the wind out in winter, where the TV never worked quite right, and where Grace kept a jar of peppermints by the door for anyone who visited. He was 10 when she took him in, one of 6 foster kids she raised over the years. He remembered her rules. Speak with purpose. Listen like your life depends on it. And above all, remember who you are before the world tells you something else. She used to touch his cheek and say, "You don't have to be loud to be strong." He wondered what she'd think of him now. Not the suit, not the company, not the defense contracts, but this version tired, alone, and on the edge of doing something that could change everything. He didn't want to destroy an airline. That wasn't the goal, but he was tired of apologizing for surviving. His phone buzzed. A text from Nina. All systems locked. "You good," he typed back. "Still seated. Still calm. Let them come to us." Another message followed. "They'll know your name soon." He stared at that line for a long time. It sat in his chest like a slow echo. Because, truth be told, he didn't want them to know his name because of this. He wanted them to know his name because of the scholarships his company funded, the communities it protected, the kids who got internships in tech firms because he remembered what it was like to be passed over. But sometimes, the fire that lights the path is the one you never wanted to start. The cabin lights dimmed again. A new voice crackled through the intercom. Different now, slightly unsettled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a systems-wide delay. Please remain patient. We'll update you shortly." Isaiah placed the book in the seat pocket, the page still unturned, because this story wasn't over. It had just begun. 10 minutes had passed since the cabin went still. Passengers sat strapped in, but their attention wasn't on safety demonstrations or seatbelt signs anymore. It had drifted collectively, almost magnetically, to the quiet man in 1A and the tension building around him. Brent Radley returned from the front of the aircraft. His posture was stiffer now, his jaw tight. In one hand, he held a small tablet. It trembled ever so slightly as he tapped through the frozen passenger manifest. Isaiah Benton remained seated, his body language unreadable, calm, yet not passive, present, yet unbothered. The kind of calm that unnerved men like Brent because it held no fear to feed on. Brent cleared his throat. "Sir," he said with artificial politeness, "we're experiencing a system error, and I'm afraid we need to deplane all passengers while we troubleshoot. It's procedure." Isaiah turned his head slowly to look at him. "Is that the official reason?" he asked. Brent hesitated. The pause was answer enough. "I see," Isaiah replied. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. "So now we're inconveniencing every single passenger because I wouldn't move from a seat I paid for." Some passengers were already pulling bags down from the overhead bins, looking confused, even agitated. The man in 1C glanced at Isaiah and then at Brent, and for the first time, he frowned. "Wait," he said. "Why are we deplaning? We haven't even pushed back yet." "It's a technical delay, sir," Brent answered quickly. "Groundside systems are having issues." "Yeah," the man said. "But this started right after you talked to that gentleman. People were listening now, watching." Isaiah's heart beat slower, not faster. This was what he hated most. Not conflict, but theater. Being forced into performance. Being turned into a symbol without consent. And yet his phone vibrated again. Nina had sent him a file. Passenger seating logs and the internal comms from the gate desk. Flags raised on his name. A note that his boarding had been manually flagged for verification, even though his profile was TSA pre-check and clear. He read the email, read it again, let the weight of it press against his ribs like a hand. They hadn't just assumed, they had acted on it. He thought about speaking up, about standing, but then remembered what Grace had once whispered when he'd been 12, staring down a teacher who accused him of cheating. "Don't rise until it matters. When you rise, make sure it means something." Brent leaned closer. "Sir, if you'd just come with me," he said, voice tighter now. "We can resolve this with less attention." Isaiah looked at him, eyes unwavering. "Attention is not what I'm seeking. Clarity is." There was a beat of silence, and then, from behind, a new voice entered the scene. It was clipped, cool, corporate, Mr. Benton, the voice said. A woman. She stepped into the aisle, her heels clicking softly against the flooring. Blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Dark navy suit. Silver name tag. Lauren Voss, CEO of Meridian Airlines. Passengers who recognized her began to whisper. Isaiah said nothing. May I have a moment, she asked, nodding toward the front galley. He considered it, then slowly stood, leaving his book on the seat. In the galley, away from public ears. Lauren folded her arms. I received a call that one of our high-tier passengers was being inconvenienced. I assume that's you. Only now do you assume that, Isaiah said. Her lips tightened. I want to apologize for any misunderstanding. We're working to fix the systems issue. This isn't a systems issue, Isaiah replied. It's a culture issue, a structural one. You can reset computers. Ms. Voss. Can you reset assumptions? She said nothing. Isaiah continued. I boarded quietly. I sat down. I showed my pass. But something about me didn't match the picture in your staff's minds of what a first-class passenger looks like. You're making this into something larger than no. He cut in. It's always been this large. You're just not used to someone who can make you see it. Lauren's jaw tightened. He watched her try to contain it, the shift between polished diplomacy and rising resentment. She wanted to fix it with policy, not humility. I'm asking for your cooperation so we can get the flight back on schedule, she said finally. Isaiah smiled. But it was tired. You want my cooperation. But you didn't ask for my dignity. That's the part most people miss. Back in the cabin, passengers were murmuring louder. Ava Dominguez had already posted her clip. It had begun spreading, inch by inch, beyond the plane, beyond the gate. Isaiah glanced back toward his seat. They're watching, he said. I know, Lauren replied, and they'll keep watching. She nodded, but the weight of it hadn't fully landed. When Isaiah returned to his seat, someone clapped once, then twice, then a few passengers followed. It wasn't a standing ovation, it wasn't grand, but it was loud enough to make Brent Radley look away. Isaiah sat down again, breathing through his nose. His phone buzzed. Another message from Nina. 3 more airports frozen. Domestic flights across 2 coasts beginning to reroute. Headquarters calling. He texted her back. Don't answer them yet. There was a moment, just then, where Isaiah felt the edges of uncertainty creep in. Not doubt he had long since stopped doubting who he was, but something else. Guilt. Not the kind that said he'd done something wrong. The kind that said he was finally doing something right, and he'd waited too long to do it. He thought about the other Isaiahs. The boy trying to get a job with a name no recruiter would pronounce correctly. The woman bumped off a flight for asking why she hadn't been offered a drink. The teenager in cuffs at 16 for asking to use the bathroom during a traffic stop. This wasn't just about his seat. It never had been. He looked out the window. The sky had softened from golden to gray. Planes around them sat still, like they were listening. The captain's voice came again. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your continued patience. We're coordinating with corporate and IT to restore functionality. We'll provide updates as soon as we can. No apologies. Not yet. But something was cracking. Isaiah leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. He was alone in that seat. But he no longer felt alone in that cabin. They hadn't taken off, but the journey had already begun. For most passengers, it started as a minor inconvenience, a technical issue, a paused flight, an announcement to stay patient. But then the mood shifted, and once it did, it was impossible to go back. Ava Dominguez sat with her phone clutched tightly in both hands. Her recording had just crossed 50,000 views. She hadn't expected it to move this fast, hadn't even meant to post it publicly at first. But something in her chest burned when she saw how calmly that man Isaiah Benton, she'd learned his name, handled it all. How he didn't raise his voice, didn't throw anything, didn't storm off. He just stood his ground, and it exposed everyone else. The comments flooded in. They're still doing this in 2025. Where's the apology? Tell me why this brother had to prove himself for a seat he already paid for. Name that airline. She looked up from the screen and noticed something she hadn't before. People were watching him, not in the curious, passive way strangers usually did on flights. No, they were watching him with something that looked a lot like shame, or maybe recognition. It was the quiet guy in 7B who stopped mid-sentence when Brent passed by. It was the mother 2 rows back who pulled her son close and whispered something in his ear. It was the businessman who earlier avoided Isaiah's gaze, but now gave him a nod when their eyes met. Something was unraveling. Meanwhile, Isaiah sat still. His body rested, but his thoughts raced. He could feel the shift in the cabin air, could sense the discomfort building, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because his presence forced people to confront the roles they played in moments like this. Silent observers, passive bystanders, polite cowards. He didn't blame them, not all of them. He'd been one of them too, once. There was a time when he would have avoided all of this, when he would have said, "It's not worth it," and walked off. But age does something strange. It doesn't always make you louder. Sometimes it just makes you done. He was done shrinking. He glanced out the window. A maintenance truck rolled past slowly. No gate agents moved. No luggage cart stirred. Every screen was frozen. He knew what Nina had done. She hadn't disabled systems. She'd mirrored them, locked them in a diagnostic state that required a full protocol reset. It was legal, encrypted, and very intentional. In the terminal control tower, panic was beginning to rise. Engineers couldn't explain it. Tech directors were on speakerphones. Executives whispered in rooms with glass walls, trying not to sweat through their suits. Back on the plane, Brent Radley stood stiffly in the galley, his radio pressed to his ear. He was receiving instructions now, but none of them offered the exit he was hoping for. His pride was caught in his throat like a fishhook. Isaiah could see him pacing, his face flushed with something between fear and fury. Across the aisle, a woman in her 50s leaned over slightly toward Isaiah. "I just want to say," she said quietly, "that I saw everything. You were calm. You were respectful. And they treated you like you didn't belong." Isaiah looked at her. She had warm eyes and a face lined by years of motherhood or leadership, maybe both. "Thank you," he said. "My grandson," she added, her voice catching a little, "is about your age. I worry about him every time he travels. He works in tech, too. Not many of you in that space, but you're out there, and you matter." Isaiah offered a small smile. He hadn't planned to become anyone's example today, but now, here he was, sitting at the intersection of visibility and silence, being seen and heard in ways that felt both heavy and holy. A child in a row 5 began to cry softly. His mother whispered lullabies into his curls, trying to soothe him. The tension in the cabin didn't help. No one knew when the flight would leave, or if it would. Then a new voice pierced the air. Why is he still on this plane? Everyone turned. The voice came from the back, a man in khakis and a golf shirt, mid-50s, red-cheeked with impatience. This whole delay started with him. Right, he snapped. I heard the whole thing. Just let the crew do their jobs. A few passengers looked away, embarrassed. Others sat frozen. Isaiah didn't turn around, but Ava did. Actually, she said, standing slowly, this delay started when someone decided his ticket wasn't good enough. Not when he boarded, when he was judged. The man rolled his eyes. This isn't a racial issue, he muttered. Ava walked a step closer. You're right. It's not just racial. It's structural. It's systemic. It's about how quickly people like you get uncomfortable when someone like him sits where you don't expect him to. The man sat back down, grumbling. Isaiah blinked, surprised by the fire in her tone. He hadn't expected an ally today, especially not one so bold. But allies often come unannounced. He remembered, just like enemies. Nina sent another text. Do you want me to reverse the locks? Isaiah stared at it for a long time. If he gave the green light, systems would reboot, flights would resume, this plane would take off, and everything would go back to normal. But what did normal mean? A cycle, reset, or a cover-up? He typed slowly. Not yet. Let them feel the stillness a little longer. He tucked the phone away and exhaled. Passengers were beginning to murmur again. Not about delays, but about him, the man who disrupted something bigger than a flight schedule. The man who wasn't yelling or suing or demanding. The man who simply stayed seated, stayed present, stayed calm. A mother took out her phone and began recording a message. My kids need to see this man, she whispered. They need to know this is what dignity looks like. Another woman nodded. A teenager opened his TikTok app and tagged a local news outlet. The cabin had changed. It wasn't just a plane anymore. It was a mirror. And Isaiah Benton had become the reflection. He didn't ask for it, but he wouldn't refuse it. Not today. Not anymore. In a glass conference room on the 11th floor of Meridian Airlines headquarters, 4 executives sat in a huddle, each staring down at the same thing. A single name, Isaiah Benton. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the horizon was beginning to lose color. Evening clouds dragged shadows across the tarmac. The digital wall in the corner displayed dozens of grounded flights in blinking amber. None of them moved. Lauren Voss stood at the head of the table, her blazer hanging from the back of her chair, sleeves rolled up. She was still trying to control the narrative. Still thinking like a CEO instead of a human being. We have to get that plane off the ground, she said. Voice clipped. Now. And what exactly do we tell the press when they ask why our systems accidentally flagged a paying black passenger for a seat downgrade? Asked one of her senior counsel. There was silence. Victor Holloway, the chief technology officer, looked pale. He had tried rebooting the back end twice. Both times failed. He didn't just freeze our software, Victor said. He mirrored it. Every input we send. It sends back like a reflection. No penetration, no breach, just silence. It's brilliant. Lauren sighed sharply. I don't care how brilliant it is. I want control back. Victor swallowed. I think he's proving a point, he added. Lauren looked at him, cold and sharp. I don't need a lecture. I need altitude. Back on the aircraft. Isaiah sat with his head leaned gently against the window. Outside, the wing light blinked softly, casting faint glows over the tarmac. He was exhausted, not from the conflict, but from the remembering. He remembered the first time a flight attendant assumed he was an athlete. not a CEO. The time a woman told him, "You clean up so well," on a business-class flight from Seattle. The time he got pulled aside 3 times at one airport because his name sounded suspicious. All of it stacked up like bricks. Heavy, uninvited, but undeniable. He felt it now in his spine, in the back of his throat. Not rage, responsibility. Across the aisle. The teenager from earlier was editing a short video with captions, "Passenger denied first class, but he owns the company that shut the plane down." Isaiah hadn't corrected anyone yet. No one on the flight knew his full story, not even Ava, who now sat near the rear galley, refreshing her post every few seconds. A few rows behind, Brent Radley stood stiffly as the junior attendant whispered to him. "Sir," she said nervously, "a few passengers are asking if they'll be compensated." Brent looked at her, for what he asked, voice barely hiding his bitterness, for the delay. His lips twitched. Then he looked down the aisle, straight at Isaiah. Not one passenger had asked Isaiah to move since the incident began. Not one person had said, "Just get off so we can go." No one dared anymore. Because now they understood. The plane wasn't stuck because of him. It was grounded by something much older, much deeper. Isaiah checked his phone. Another message from Nina. "CNN has your name. So does BBC. You'll be trending in 15 minutes. He sighed. He had tried so hard to avoid becoming a symbol. He had built a company rooted in silence, digital defense, privacy, code without ego. And now here he was in the most public theater imaginable, in front of hundreds of eyes, slowly becoming something he hadn't asked to be. A man holding a mirror to an industry, to a country, and to himself. He thought about Grace. She used to sit on the porch in the evenings with a book and a glass of sweet tea. When he was 14, she told him that some storms aren't meant to be avoided. "Some storms," she said, "are sent to show others what you're made of." His eyes stung, and he closed them for a moment. At the same time, Brent paced into the cockpit to speak with the captain. The door stayed ajar just long enough for Isaiah to hear a few words. "We can't keep sitting here," Brent said. "He's pushing us to the edge." The captain replied, calm but firm, the edge of what protocol or conscience Brent didn't answer. The pilot stepped into the cabin shortly after, smoothing his uniform as he addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we understand this is an unusual situation. We've been advised not to proceed until our systems are fully cleared. We thank you for your patience." His eyes briefly met Isaiah's. No animosity, just quiet understanding. When he turned back toward the cockpit, Isaiah felt his throat tighten again, a strange cocktail of relief and sadness. Maybe he wasn't alone on this plane after all. Then came a small note of kindness. A flight attendant, the same junior one from earlier, approached him, gently placing a cup of water and a warm towel on his tray. "I thought you might need this," she said softly. Isaiah looked up. "Thank you." She gave a small nod, then walked away, glancing at Brent over her shoulder as if challenging him to stop her. And for the first time, Brent didn't say a word. Isaiah sipped the water slowly, letting the moment breathe. His phone buzzed again. Nina's latest message read, "They've called an emergency board meeting at Meridian. I have the link if you want to watch." He stared at it. He hadn't even dialed anyone yet. Just pause the system. Let them sit with it. Let them feel what it was like to lose power. Not permanently, just momentarily. But for some people, even a moment was unbearable. He opened the live stream. The boardroom filled his screen. Lauren stood at the center, surrounded by men in shirt sleeves and women with exhausted eyes. One board member asked, "What's our exposure?" Another replied, "Reputation, liability, and loss of consumer trust. All of it." Lauren rubbed her temples. "I want to speak to him directly," she said. Isaiah locked his screen, then turned to look down the cabin again. People were no longer just sitting. They were thinking. Some brows furrowed. Others nodded silently to themselves. A few even began whispering about diversity training, lawsuits, and corporate culture. He knew this wasn't over, but it had begun. And it had begun with something so small, a seat, but not really. It had begun with being seen and not moved, with being assumed and not explained, with being told to step aside and refusing. Isaiah Benton sat quietly in 1A, still, but not silent, alone, but not abandoned. A man in a seat he paid for, a man in the mirror of a broken system. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't shrink. He stayed. Isaiah Benton didn't move for several minutes after ending the live stream. His phone sat on the tray table, screen dimmed, his fingers still resting against its frame. The plane was quieter now, not from lack of noise, but from something deeper. Awareness. Awareness that something unusual was happening here. Something not about delays or seat disputes. Something more fundamental. Passengers felt it like a pressure drop in the cabin, an unseen shift in gravity. Isaiah reached into his carry-on and pulled out a small leather case. Inside was an old fountain pen and a piece of folded paper he kept from years ago, a letter from Grace, written the night before his college graduation. The edges were worn soft, the ink faded at the corners, but he could still hear her voice in every line. She had written, "You will rise, not because they let you, but because you already know how." He smiled gently, pressing the paper flat on his knee. Then, with a deep breath, he reached for the phone again. The time had come. He dialed. The line clicked once, then twice. "Orion Control." A clipped voice answered. "Nina Carter speaking." "It's time," Isaiah said. No questions followed. No hesitation. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Do you want to start soft or full blackout?" He thought about that for a moment. The executives at Meridian were still scrambling. The cabin crew was uneasy, but not panicking. The passengers, especially those who were watching him, deserved clarity. "Start soft," he said. "Stagger it. Let the system show its cracks." "Understood," Nina replied. "They'll feel it in 6 minutes." He ended the call. There was no cinematic swelling of music, no dramatic speech, just quiet intent. Isaiah didn't need volume to shake the ground. He had learned long ago that silence could be just as powerful if wielded right. 6 minutes later, things began to change. Inside the cabin, seat monitors flickered and went dark. The onboard Wi-Fi dropped suddenly, causing a flurry of confused tapping across tablets and laptops. Brent Radley's radio emitted a loud static burst, then cut out completely. The intercom crackled, then fell silent. Even the digital safety briefing loop on the ceiling screens froze mid-frame. Passengers shifted in their seats. "What's going on?" someone whispered. A voice nearby responded, "My app just logged me out. Everything's frozen." In the cockpit, the captain tried to run a routine pre-flight check. The diagnostic screen stuttered, showing red bars. He frowned and tapped the display. Nothing moved. He turned to the co-pilot. "Did we get clearance from dispatch yet?" "No," the co-pilot replied. Puzzled, "No comms from tower either. And our GPS is blinking out." Back in the galley, Brent tried to open the emergency override panel. The keypad didn't respond. His hands began to sweat. Then a flight attendant came rushing toward him, her voice tense. "Sir." Two of the lavatory locks just reset on their own. No one was inside. Brent's composure started to crack. He looked toward the front of the plane. Isaiah sat still in seat 1A, phone resting silently beside him. Brent approached, his steps louder than necessary. "Sir," he said through clenched teeth, "I don't know what you're doing, but you need to stop it. Right now." Isaiah turned his head slowly. His expression was calm, not passive, not smug, just assured. "I paid for this seat," he said. "I boarded according to the rules. I complied with every instruction. And when you tried to strip that away from me, when you assumed who I was and who I wasn't, I simply responded." Brent scoffed. "By shutting down an airline, no," Isaiah said quietly. "By showing you what control really looks like." Brent's eyes flicked around. He was losing the room, and he knew it. Passengers were watching again. Phones lifted. Screens pointed. No one said a word, but the shift was unmistakable. This wasn't a dispute anymore. It was documentation, and it terrified Brent. He turned sharply and walked away, disappearing toward the back of the plane. Isaiah glanced down at his phone. Nina had sent a new update. Ground control systems failing across regional terminals. Social media tracking 6 million views across 3 platforms. Hashtags trending, ED black man boarded. He's seeking justice. Orion response. Isaiah exhaled slowly. He had known there would be consequences. But even now, he couldn't have predicted how fast the ripple would move. He looked across the aisle and saw the older woman from earlier nod at him softly. "I hope my grandson is watching," she whispered, from a few rows behind. Ava Dominguez leaned forward. "Sir," she said gently, I think people are starting to see." Isaiah gave a slow, solemn nod. Then it was worth it. At Meridian HQ, the boardroom lights felt harsher now. The flight status board had gone completely black. No updates, no codes. Just silence. Lauren Voss gripped the edge of the table. "This man," she muttered, "this man just crippled us without a single lawsuit or protest." Victor Holloway spoke up. "He didn't crash our systems. He mirrored us. He exposed what we already are." Lauren stared at him. "What does that even mean?" Victor didn't flinch. "It means we built a system that collapses the moment it's questioned." The words echoed. Isaiah knew the narrative would be shaped by media in hours. But right now, the truth was unfiltered. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't fought. He had simply refused to back down. And then he made the world watch. The truth wasn't just in the silence. It was in the stillness. And stillness was contagious. The captain emerged from the cockpit, his brow furrowed. He approached Isaiah, stopping 1 row away. "I've flown planes for 22 years, he said, "and I've never seen anything like this." Isaiah looked up. "Neither have I." The captain nodded. "You handled it with grace." "I wasn't trying to cause chaos," Isaiah said. "But maybe some systems need to break before they can be rebuilt." The captain took a breath. "Well, consider this your runway." Isaiah gave a small smile. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just tired of asking for permission to belong. The lights overhead dimmed suddenly. A hushed murmur spread through the cabin. Isaiah picked up his phone again. He typed a single message. "Let them sit with this overnight," Nina replied instantly. "Message received." And with that, Isaiah placed his phone back on the tray. Outside, the tarmac lights flickered as ground crews scrambled without systems to guide them. In the terminal, passengers on other flights began pulling out phones, whispering about rumors, about a CEO, about a shutdown. Inside the aircraft, Isaiah Benton sat still, heart quiet. He didn't need to fly to make them move. He had already taken off. From the outside, Terminal 4 of Brighton International looked like any other bustling hub. Screens flickered with departure delays. Travelers sipped coffee, paced impatiently, or sat hunched over phones. But the gate marked 29A, where Flight 327 had been scheduled to depart nearly 2 hours ago, had transformed into something else entirely. A vortex, a flashpoint, a reckoning. Across news channels, talking heads speculated on the cause of the unprecedented system failure sweeping across Meridian Airlines operations. Some suggested it was a cyber attack. Others blamed internal sabotage, but none of them had Isaiah Benton's name yet. Inside the cabin of Flight 327, passengers remained grounded but strangely silent. The air had shifted from confusion to contemplation. They weren't just stuck. They were witnessing something unfold, something bigger than a delay. Isaiah sat quietly in 1A, hands folded. He hadn't spoken since his final message to Nina. He didn't need to. The call had already been made. The engine of accountability was humming in the background now, slow but unstoppable. But the silence was temporary, because power never yields without resistance. Back in the Meridian Airlines headquarters, Lauren Voss paced the boardroom like a wolf in a glass cage. Her phone lit up with incoming messages. Executives, PR firms, legal counsel, media liaisons, all asking the same thing. What are we telling the public? She ignored them. Her eyes narrowed on the screen in front of her. A blurry passenger video, taken from somewhere in row 6, showed Isaiah calmly speaking with Brent Radley. By showing you what control really looks like. The clip was 30 seconds long. It had already been viewed over 9 million times. Lauren's jaw clenched. I want that video down, she snapped. Too late, muttered Victor Holloway, seated across from her. It's on 6 platforms, mirrored, downloaded, subtitled in 3 languages already. Lauren turned on him. We are not going to be dismantled by one man with a phone. Victor shook his head slowly. He didn't use the phone to destroy us. He used it to reflect us. She didn't like that answer. So she looked for a target. I want that man off the plane, she said flatly. Removed. Quietly. The room stilled. A legal advisor cleared his throat. Ma'am, if we forcibly remove him now, especially with a digital trail this long, this will escalate beyond repair. Lauren leaned over the table, voice dropping. Then don't make it look like force. Use protocol. Use pretense. Tell them we need to deboard for safety inspections. Just get him off that aircraft. At gate 29A. The door to the jet bridge opened, and a uniformed operations manager stepped through with a security officer behind her. The two walked slowly, deliberately, until they reached the front of the plane. Inside the cabin, the air grew taut. Passengers stopped speaking. Eyes turned, phones lifted. Isaiah looked up calmly as the woman in the navy blazer approached. Mr. Benton, she said, with a professional smile. We've received a notice to conduct an additional systems inspection on this aircraft. We're going to need all passengers to deplane briefly. Her tone was light, almost rehearsed. Isaiah met her eyes. This inspection, he said, did it begin after your CEO saw the video? The woman's smile faltered. I'm just following orders, sir. He stood slowly, retrieving his leather bag from under the seat. The cabin held its breath. Brent Radley stood behind the crew curtain, watching intently, arms crossed. But Isaiah didn't walk toward the door. Instead, he turned and looked at the passengers. They weren't strangers anymore. They had seen the shift, felt it. "You don't have to stay silent," Isaiah said softly, but clearly. "If you think this is about a technical check, I won't argue. But if you know it's more than that, if you've ever felt what it's like to be dismissed for who you are before you even speak, then you understand what this really is." A pause. Then Ava Dominguez stood. "If he's going, I'm going too." A middle-aged man next to her followed. "Me too." Then a younger woman. "I'm not flying with an airline that punishes dignity." And then, one by one, half the cabin stood. Brent stepped forward. "This is a violation of FAA compliance. You're all interfering with a security protocol." A man in a business suit turned to him. "No, we're interfering with your agenda." Brent reddened, speechless. The operations manager looked rattled. She pulled out her radio to speak to dispatch, but it crackled uselessly. Isaiah turned to the security officer behind her. "Do you plan to remove me?" The officer, a tall black man in his 40s, looked at him long and hard. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I don't think that's necessary." Then he turned and walked back through the jet bridge. The manager hesitated, then followed. The cabin erupted into soft applause. Not loud, not theatrical, just firm. Brent disappeared again behind the galley. Isaiah slowly returned to his seat. Outside, on the tarmac, news vans had begun arriving. Someone had leaked the story. Reporters rushed toward the terminal. Passengers from other flights craned their necks toward the windows. Nina Carter sent a new update. Meridian Airlines down 11% in after-hours trading. Internal documents leaked anonymously. Full investigation pending. Your name is everywhere. Isaiah closed his eyes briefly. He hadn't set out to break the system, just to be treated like he belonged in the one he helped build. But now the truth had breached the hull. There was no going back. In the Meridian boardroom, Lauren Voss slammed her phone down. "Get me PR. I want a full statement drafted. Apologize if you have to. But bury the words. Focus on systems. Use phrases like technical recalibration and isolated procedural error." Victor Holloway rose quietly. "I'm resigning at the end of the week." She looked at him in disbelief. "I can't defend a structure that punishes the truth just because it's inconvenient," he added. Then he left the room, and for the first time all day, Lauren was alone, not just in the room, but in her position. Back on Flight 327, the cabin lights brightened again. The captain came out once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the fatigue of the day, "we'll remain grounded until systems stabilize, but I want to say something on my own behalf." The passengers quieted. He looked at Isaiah. "We're trained to read instruments. Today, I read people, and what I saw reminded me that dignity doesn't need a manual." Isaiah nodded. The captain returned to the cockpit, and the passengers stayed in their seats not in protest, but in solidarity. Outside, the world kept watching, but now it was listening too. Isaiah Benton never liked interviews. Even in his early days, when Orion Cyber Defense had first begun making headlines, he'd preferred to stay in the background. He believed in letting work speak louder than words. Data didn't lie. Systems didn't exaggerate. But now, as the sun set beyond Gate 29A and the chaos he'd triggered ricocheted across the media, silence was no longer an option. The request came through Nina. Ava Dominguez, the young woman from the cabin, had posted a brief video explaining what she saw, why she stood up, and why she wouldn't fly with Meridian again. It was passionate, clear, and deeply human. Within 2 hours, it had 10 million views. Producers from a national news outlet had reached out to Ava directly. They wanted to speak to Isaiah. Just 5 minutes on air. A remote satellite connection. Nothing invasive, but it was live, and the world would be watching. Nina's voice was gentle when she relayed the request. "You don't have to do this," she said. "We can issue a statement. Keep it corporate." Isaiah looked out the cabin window at the flashing tarmac lights. Somewhere in the distance, other planes were landing and taking off again, trying to resume their rhythm. But this aircraft Flight 327 was still grounded, still quiet. He thought of Grace, of the long nights she sat with him at the kitchen table, teaching him how to write cursive, how to carry himself when his name wasn't enough to enter a room, how to stay seated even when the world begged him to stand and walk away. "I'll do it," he said quietly. 30 minutes later, they brought in a camera crew, just 2 people. Soft-spoken, they set up a light and a small mic. No dressing room, no script. The news anchor would ask questions live from the studio. Isaiah would answer from his seat on the aircraft. A small crowd of passengers chose to stay. Not to interfere, just to witness. It was a strange thing, this blend of intimacy and broadcast. When the red light blinked on, Isaiah felt none of the nerves he'd expected. Only a stillness, the same kind he'd felt when he made the call. The anchor's voice came through a small earpiece. "Mr. Benton, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for having me. You've made national news today. Some are calling it the most effective corporate disruption in aviation history. Others are questioning whether it was reckless. Why did you do it?" Isaiah took a breath. "I didn't set out to disrupt anything. I came here to board a flight, sit in the seat I paid for, and attend a family gathering. But when a man like me is treated like a threat simply for existing in first class, when assumptions override policy, then the problem isn't me. It's the lens through which they saw me." The anchor continued. "Many have watched the footage of your quiet resistance. You never raised your voice, never argued. Why did you choose silence instead of confrontation?" Isaiah's eyes didn't leave the camera. "Because dignity doesn't need volume, and because I knew there would be children watching, young people who look like me. They don't need more images of us being angry. They need images of us being unshakable. Some executives at Meridian Airlines say you weaponized your influence to cause chaos." He smiled, slightly. "I didn't weaponize anything. I just stopped asking for permission." The anchor leaned in on the next question. "What do you want to happen now? An apology, resignations?" Isaiah paused. This was the moment that mattered. "I want accountability," he said. "Not performative change, not hastily written diversity pledges. I want systems that don't require someone to be rich or powerful in order to be treated with respect." "And what would you say to critics who think this was about ego?" He tilted his head slightly. "My ego didn't get me removed from my seat. My skin did, and that's not an opinion. That's a fact witnessed by everyone on this plane." There was a pause on the other end, then a soft pivot. "Last question. You've stayed incredibly composed through all of this. But how has it affected you personally?" Isaiah looked down briefly, then back at the lens. "Grace Benton, the woman who raised me, used to say, 'They can take a seat, but they can't take your center.' But today they tried. And for a moment, I questioned whether I'd done something wrong, whether I should have just accepted it, let them move me, let it slide." He swallowed. But I remembered her voice, I remembered that the cost of silence is always paid by the next generation, so I stayed seated. The red light blinked off. The interview was over. No one clapped. No one needed to. The cabin was full of quiet tears. Even Brent Radley, standing in the galley, heard every word. He didn't move, didn't say a thing, but something in his posture shifted, as if the weight of what he'd done had finally found a way through the layers of uniform and protocol. Isaiah leaned back, exhausted but steady. Nina texted immediately. That was everything they needed to hear. Outside the aircraft, media vans were lined up like ambulances, not for injury, but for truth. Isaiah didn't care about trending tags anymore. This wasn't about PR. This was about legacy, his own, and the one he was building for others, at Meridian HQ. Lauren Voss watched the interview replay in silence. Not one executive dared to speak when it ended. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, harsh, stripped of the authority she'd always relied on. What Isaiah said couldn't be undone by legal spin or distraction, because it wasn't just a story, it was a confession, a mirror, a truth so calm, so measured, it left no room for denial. She picked up her phone. Her voice was flat. "Tell PR to cancel the statement. We're not writing anything tonight." And tomorrow asked her assistant. She stared at the paused frame of Isaiah Benton on the screen. "Tomorrow," she said slowly. "We listen." Back on the aircraft, the passengers settled into a strange kind of stillness. Not boredom, not restlessness, reflection. A young boy leaned over the aisle and asked his mother softly, "Mom, why were they mean to that man?" The mother blinked, unsure how to begin. Isaiah heard. He turned gently and said, "They weren't ready to see someone like me in this seat." The boy thought for a second. "Well, I think you belong here." Isaiah smiled. "So do I." And for the first time in hours, the cabin felt light. Not because the plane had lifted, but because something heavier had landed. The morning after the interview, the sun rose with sharp clarity over Brighton International Airport. News anchors called it the most watched aviation interview in history. Headlines blazed across networks. Hashtags trended globally. But inside Flight 327, things remained quiet. Isaiah Benton had barely slept. He hadn't needed to. His mind had moved beyond the moment. What began as an act of personal dignity had evolved into something he could no longer control. The pressure wasn't just on Meridian Airlines anymore. It was shifting toward the industry, toward regulators, even toward his own board of directors. At 6:18 a.m., Nina Carter sent a message. "Need to speak? Urgent? Not bad. Just big." Isaiah nodded to himself and stepped out of the aircraft for the first time in over 12 hours. Security had been reinforced, but not for his protection. The airline wanted to ensure no reporters breached protocol. Too late for that. He found an empty conference room just off the terminal and called Nina. She didn't say hello. "It's the Secretary of Transportation." Isaiah blinked. "What?" "They saw the interview. They saw the video. They want to meet. Not just about Meridian, about a national audit, bias training, reporting structures. They want to talk to you about designing the framework." He stood still, the echo of her voice bouncing off the walls. "This isn't just a seat anymore, Isaiah," Nina said quietly. "It's a platform." He leaned against the wall, heart heavy, not with fear, but with weight. He hadn't asked for a national movement. He'd asked to be treated like a human being. But sometimes one truth cracked open 1,000 locked doors, and people were stepping through. Meanwhile, across town, in a glass tower of Meridian Airlines headquarters. Lauren Voss faced her board of directors. They were not calm. "This is escalating. We're being crucified across every platform," one man said, throwing a folder across the table. "Our stock lost 18% in 48 hours. Lauren remained still. "The FAA is knocking. The media isn't backing off." And Holloway quit. "Are you planning to do anything other than watch this company fall apart?" Lauren took a breath. "There are times for power," she said, "and there are times for accountability." She opened a document in front of her. "This is a full internal review proposal. I drafted it myself. We're suspending Brent Radley, launching an equity audit across all staff levels, and issuing an apology not written by our lawyers." The room fell silent. "What changed?" someone whispered. Lauren looked toward the window. "I watched the interview again. He didn't attack us. He invited us to be better." Silence. "And if we don't accept that invitation," she added, "then maybe we deserve what's coming." Back at the terminal, Isaiah returned to the plane. His seat, 1A, felt different now. It no longer represented access. It had become a symbol. He wasn't just sitting for himself anymore. Passengers greeted him quietly. Ava offered him a warm cup of coffee. "It's black," she said. "No sugar." I remembered. He smiled. The little details always mattered most. The captain came out once more, standing near the front. "I wanted to tell you," he said gently. "I've flown for 23 years. I've seen storms, engine failures, mid-air medical emergencies, but I've never seen turbulence like this on the ground, and I've never respected a passenger more." Isaiah nodded. "Thank you for staying grounded." "You gave us a reason to," the captain replied. Minutes later, Nina called again. "You need to see this." She sent a link. It was a live stream. The Secretary of Transportation was giving a press conference. There are moments when systems reveal their flaws, not through violence or chaos, but through quiet resistance. What happened aboard Flight 327 has exposed a cultural blind spot in aviation, one that no amount of automation or policy can excuse. She paused. "That's why, as of this morning, we are opening a federal review into racially biased treatment across all major carriers. And we've invited Isaiah Benton, CEO of Orion Cyber Defense, to serve as an advisor to this initiative." Gas filled the cabin. Isaiah's heart dropped not in fear, but awe. This wasn't a reaction anymore. It was a redirection, a rerouting of how the world worked in the skies. He looked out the window as a plane lifted off in the distance. For the first time in a long while, he felt something that had eluded him for months. Hope. Across the terminal, Brent Radley sat alone in a break room. He hadn't been officially suspended yet, but the calls had stopped. His superiors stopped returning messages. No one told him where to report next. He watched the press conference with a clenched jaw, then slowly turned the screen off. For the first time, he didn't feel like a professional. He felt like a man who had chosen silence when he should have spoken, who had followed the wrong instincts, who had used the rule book like a weapon. He looked in the mirror behind the coffee machine, and he didn't like what he saw. At Gate 29A, Lauren Voss walked onto Flight 327. The entire cabin turned. Isaiah looked up as she approached. She didn't come with cameras or handlers, just a file folder and tired eyes. She paused before him. "I owe you more than an apology." He stayed quiet. "I built a system that rewards obedience and punishes humanity," she said, "and I used to be proud of it. I thought I was protecting the company, but I was protecting myself." Passengers listened in complete silence. Isaiah stood. "I don't want your job. he said gently. "I don't want revenge. I know. I want to be able to fly," he added, "without needing to remind someone who I am just to be treated like I belong." Lauren nodded. She extended the folder. "We're launching a joint initiative. You'll see the details. It includes bias training, a zero-tolerance policy on profiling, passenger rights education, and a seat at the board table for someone like you. Not a token, a partner." He took the folder, but didn't look inside. "I'll read it later." Lauren turned to go. As she walked away, she passed the rows of passengers. Some nodded at her, some didn't. But all of them saw her differently now. Not forgiven, but finally seeing. Isaiah sat down again. The sky was changing, but this time it was because people had finally looked up and seen something worth following. The next afternoon, Isaiah Benton sat alone in a quiet corner of the executive lounge. It was the first time since the incident that he wasn't surrounded by people, cameras, or questions. Even Nina had given him space. She knew him well enough to recognize when his silence meant thinking rather than hiding. The world outside the lounge was moving at a dizzying pace. Overnight, 4 more airlines had announced bias audits. 3 Fortune 500 CEOs had released public letters supporting accountability in aviation. One carrier even offered Isaiah a blank check to consult on its DEI overhaul. Isaiah wasn't flattered. He was skeptical. Change didn't come from statements. It came from systems, from uncomfortable conversations in closed rooms where no one was trending, from power restructured, not repackaged. A soft chime pulled him out of his thoughts. His phone buzzed with a message from Victor Holloway, the now former CTO of Meridian. He didn't expect that. Victor's message was short. "I resigned. Couldn't watch them fix the optics and leave the culture intact." Coffee. Isaiah stared at the screen. He had no reason to meet Victor, no obligation, but something in the man's choice to walk away on his own terms gave Isaiah pause. He replied, "1 hour. Terminal C. Quiet grounds." Victor was already seated when Isaiah arrived. He looked tired, but relieved. "I figured you'd ignore me," he said honestly. Isaiah sat across from him. "I almost did." They sipped coffee in silence for a moment. Victor broke it. "I knew what they were doing was wrong. I knew it when Brent flagged your name and didn't flag the white guy next to you. I knew it when Lauren asked if we had any legal exposure. But I didn't speak up, and I don't expect forgiveness." Isaiah nodded slowly. "I'm not offering any." Victor smiled without offense. "Fair. But I will say this," Isaiah continued. "The fact that you quit without being forced says something. You're not trying to cleanse your name. You're trying to reclaim your integrity." Victor leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They offered me a severance package to stay quiet. I turned it down. I'm talking to the DOT next week. I'll share everything. The culture, the risk assessments, even the internal emails." Isaiah studied him. "You're burning bridges. I'm lighting a better one." They left the cafe with no fanfare, no photos, no performance. Just 2 men, once on opposite sides of power, now walking towards something that felt a little closer to truth. But truth, Isaiah was learning, always came with a price. Later that evening, Nina met him back at the hotel. Her eyes were bright but cautious. "You're not going to like this," she said. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "What now?" 3 major airlines want you to co-sign a joint reform charter. Public press event. Big show of unity." He folded his arms. "Who wrote it?" "They did. Legal teams mostly. It's safe. Sanitized. Pledges and commitments. Nothing binding." He sighed. "That's not reform. That's reputation management. I know, she said, but it's getting harder to separate those two in this moment. Isaiah looked out the window of the suite. The city lights blinked like a nervous heartbeat. He hated this part, the dance between public pressure and corporate convenience. What if, he said slowly, we hosted our own summit? A real one. Not for cameras, for outcomes. Nina blinked. You want to convene the people trying to avoid accountability? I want to invite the ones who feel the discomfort and show up anyway. She nodded slowly, already making mental lists. And if they refuse, Isaiah smiled softly, then we'll know who's serious. But the cost of truth wasn't only measured in corporate discomfort. That night, Isaiah called his sister in Houston. They hadn't spoken in weeks, not out of tension, just time. She answered on the second ring. Well, look who remembers he has family. He laughed, the sound easing some of the weight in his chest. I've been distracted. I know. I've seen your face on every screen in Texas. Her voice softened. Proud of you. Zay. He paused.
But I'm proud of what you're doing, she said. But I also remember how tired you were 6 months ago. How you said you were losing yourself in all the noise. Don't lose your peace trying to fix what other people broke. Isaiah sat down on the edge of the bed. What if this is the reason I've been in those rooms all these years? What if this is the moment Grace prepared me for? Maybe it is, she said. But remember, she never told you to fix everything. She told you to stay centered. The call ended with a promise to visit soon. But Isaiah sat awake afterward, replaying her words. Stay centered. He thought about the cost of leadership, of speaking out, of standing up and staying seated. He thought about how the world applauds the first moment, but rarely sticks around for the slow, grinding work of real transformation. He thought about how tempting it would be to accept the interviews, the advisory roles, the book deals that were already being floated, and how hollow it would feel to gain influence but lose integrity. He opened his laptop, drafted an outline, the Isaiah Benton Equity Forum. No red carpets, no cameras, just CEOs, regulators, community leaders, and frontline workers sitting at the same table. Not to posture, to plan, not to save face, to save lives. He sent it to Nina with the subject line, "Let's make this real." Then he closed the laptop and exhaled. He didn't need to be the hero. He just needed to hold the door open long enough for others to walk through. The conference room at the Harmony Civic Center wasn't flashy. No branding, no banners, just clean walls, warm wood tones, and a long circular table that forced every participant to face one another. It was intentional. Isaiah Benton didn't want rows. He wanted presence, dialogue, humanity. The Isaiah Benton Equity Forum had officially begun. The media had been told it was private. No cameras, no statements, no applause breaks, just leaders, some willing, some reluctant, sitting together with one shared reality. They could not ignore what had happened aboard Flight 327, and they could no longer act like the skies were immune to the world's wounds. Nina Carter stood by the entrance, clipboard in hand, watching everyone arrive. She was calm, focused, unshakable. One by one, they came, executives from 7 airlines, senior FAA advisors, community advocates, a union rep for flight attendants, a young gate agent from Newark who had gone viral weeks earlier for standing up to racial profiling. He was invited too, and Isaiah, standing quietly by the window, welcomed each one with a handshake that held weight. When the room filled, Isaiah stepped forward. "Thank you for showing up," he began.
His voice was even, but carried like a steady heartbeat. This isn't a summit for PR. It's a space for real work. Because we don't fix a culture of exclusion with headlines. We fix it by doing what's hardest, changing what's comfortable. The room remained silent, listening. There's no script today, no stage. We're not here to be seen. We're here to see. For the next hour, people spoke. A flight attendant recounted how her calls about repeated discrimination from a supervisor were dismissed. An airline VP admitted their own internal surveys had shown discomfort among minority staff, but nothing had been done. The gate agent from Newark shared what it felt like to choose conscience over job security, and Isaiah just listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't perform. He nodded, took notes. Occasionally asked a quiet question that made people pause and consider their assumptions. It was working until it wasn't. Near the second break, a tall man in a slate-gray suit stood up without waiting to be called on. Let's not pretend this whole thing isn't built around one man's ego. A ripple moved through the room. The man continued, I'm not here to dismantle an industry to appease Twitter. Mr. Benton had a bad experience. That doesn't make him the voice of aviation equity. Isaiah didn't flinch, but Nina stood up, ready to step in. Isaiah raised a hand gently. I'd like to respond, he said. The room turned back to him. You're right, he began. I'm not the voice of aviation equity. I never asked to be. I didn't start this because I wanted a title. I started it because I got tired of shrinking to fit into spaces I helped build. He turned to the man directly. You don't have to like me. You don't have to agree with me. But you will not come into this room. This room we open with humility and use it to protect the status quo. The room went quiet again. Not tense, respectful. The man didn't respond. He sat down and didn't speak again. Later, when the break resumed, the younger gate agent approached Isaiah. That was incredible, he said, barely more than a whisper. You didn't raise your voice, but I felt every word. Isaiah smiled gently. Sometimes power doesn't need volume. It just needs truth. As the summit moved into its final session, something remarkable began to happen. People started not just acknowledging bias, but committing to action. A pilot union rep proposed a cross-airline ethics board. An executive from Stellar Air offered full transparency on customer treatment audits. A tech founder offered to help create anonymous reporting software for airline employees. And when it was time to close, Isaiah didn't summarize the day. He did something simpler. He walked to the center of the circle, sat down, and invited others to speak their intentions aloud. I commit to rewriting how we train our staff because neutrality isn't enough, said one. I commit to listening to voices that weren't invited to the boardroom before, said another. I commit to remembering what this room felt like human, not corporate. Then, finally, Isaiah stood once more. This isn't the end. It's the threshold. This room is just a doorway. It stays open as long as we walk through it, together. He didn't ask for applause, but he got it anyway. Afterward, Nina and Isaiah stood outside in the evening breeze, away from the noise. You okay? She asked. He nodded, exhaling. Better than okay. You handled that guy, with grace. Isaiah smiled. Anger is fuel, but it doesn't drive the plane. Purpose does. She looked at him thoughtfully. You really think things will change? I think we just made it harder for them not to, before they left. Isaiah took one last walk through the now empty room. The chairs were still warm from presence. The circle was still unbroken. He thought about Grace Benton again, how she used to tell him, Don't just open doors, baby. Leave them open behind you. He was doing that now, not just for himself, but for the child whose family was once skipped in the boarding line, for the elder who was asked to show ID 3 times while others weren't, for the young employee afraid to speak up, for the passengers who wanted nothing but fair skies and found turbulence in the aisles instead. The door had been opened, and this time it would stay that way. Isaiah Benton arrived at Gate 43A just as the early boarding call echoed softly through the terminal. He walked without rush, his carry-on rolling behind him, his boarding pass on his phone just like always. It had been 41 days since Flight 327. Same route, same city, same plane model, but everything felt different. The boarding agent smiled at him without a second glance at his name. No hesitation, no coded language, just a welcome nod and a polite, "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Benton." He stepped into the jet bridge. The familiar scent of aviation fuel and recycled air brought back flashes Brent Radley's cold eyes. The moment he was stopped, the silence afterward. But this time, Isaiah didn't shrink. He carried himself with the same quiet certainty that had brought an entire industry to its knees, not in vengeance, but in reckoning. When he reached his seat, 1A, he paused. Not out of fear, out of reverence. This seat had become a symbol, whether he wanted it to or not. A stage where a man's dignity had been challenged and reclaimed. He sat down, adjusted the headrest, and looked out the window. The tarmac stretched like a blank page. Anything could be written from here. A few minutes later, a familiar voice broke the quiet. "Mr. Benton." He turned. It was the new cabin manager, a black woman in her 50s with silver-streaked braids and steady eyes. "My name's Denise. I just wanted to personally say, we see you, and thank you, not just for what you did, but how you did it." Isaiah gave her a soft smile. "I appreciate that." She nodded and moved on, leaving him in the gentle hush of pre-takeoff stillness. The plane filled, not with tension this time, but with people who had seen the news, read the statements, watched the interviews. Some glanced at him with quiet recognition. None disturbed him. He wasn't a spectacle anymore. He was a presence. The pilot's voice came through the overhead. "Welcome aboard Stellar Flight 327 to Atlanta. Today's flight will be just under 2 hours, with mostly smooth skies." Isaiah closed his eyes briefly. 2 hours. That's all it had taken to unravel a silence that had lasted years. After takeoff, he pulled out his notebook, not the digital one, but the old-school leather journal Grace Benton had given him when he turned 25. She'd told him, "Write it down. Baby, the world forgets our stories too fast." So he wrote. Not about the lawsuit, or the summit, or the praise. He wrote about the small things. The gate agent in Newark who texted him last week. Still scared. Still showing up. The young Latina passenger who had filmed the incident, Ava Dominguez, now working on a documentary about bias in travel. Victor Holloway, who was now testifying before Congress. And Nina. Steady, brilliant Nina, who'd held the company together while Isaiah fought for something bigger than the bottom line. He wrote about his sister, who had started a mentoring circle for black teenage boys after their last conversation. "You lit a match. Zay," she told him. "I'm carrying the flame here." And he wrote about Grace. How she'd smile if she saw what seat he was in today. How she'd probably say, "Don't get comfortable. Baby, first class is just a seat. Your worth ain't stitched into the fabric of a chair." An hour into the flight, the woman across the aisle leaned over slightly. "I just want you to know. I teach sociology. My students followed what happened. We had a whole week of lessons on power, silence, and courage. You gave them something real." Isaiah thanked her gently. The thing was, he hadn't set out to teach. He just refused to shrink. And maybe that was the lesson. As the plane began its descent, Isaiah looked down at the city below. Lights flickered like neurons firing, signaling connection, change, memory. He thought about all the doors still unopened, all the boardrooms still silent, all the airports still unsafe for people who didn't fit someone else's picture of belonging. He didn't believe in happy endings, but he believed in forward motion. The landing was smooth. Applause rippled softly through the cabin. Not for him, just for the flight, for the everyday miracle of arriving. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Isaiah didn't stand immediately. He waited, watched. An elderly man dropped his bag, and a young white passenger picked it up without hesitation. Two girls in middle seats swapped phone numbers after bonding over music, and Denise, the cabin manager, gave Isaiah a nod as she passed. Respectful, familiar, not performative, just human. He stepped off the plane into the jet bridge, back into a world still in flux, still flawed, but a little more awake than it was before. Outside, Nina was waiting with a car. "Flight okay?" she asked as they slid into the back seat. He smiled. It was quiet. "I like that." She pulled out her tablet. "Dot wants to meet again. 4 more companies are asking to join the equity pledge, and there's a letter from the White House." Isaiah shook his head with a light chuckle. "I'm just trying to breathe. Nina." She looked at him sideways. "You know breathing isn't your strength. Maybe I'll learn." They drove in silence for a while, city lights streaking past. Then Isaiah spoke again. "You ever wonder what it means to win?" Nina tilted her head. "Not often." "Why?" "Because if we measure victory by applause, we'll chase noise forever. But if we measure it by presence, by how much space we create for others to stand tall, maybe that's enough." She nodded slowly. "You created a lot of space." "Zay? Then let's keep it open." And with that, they drove on into the evening, 2 people who didn't need a title, a podium, or permission. Just each other, and a sky that finally felt wide enough for everyone. Sometimes, justice doesn't shout. It doesn't throw punches. It simply takes its seat and refuses to get up. Isaiah Benton didn't start a war. He made a choice to no longer shrink into spaces that were never made for him. To stand tall, not just for himself, but for every passenger ever asked to prove their worth, every worker ever silenced, every child watching, wondering if they belonged. This isn't just a victory. It's a reminder that systems can be challenged, that culture can be rewritten, that change doesn't always come from noise. Sometimes it comes from presence. But let's be honest, the fight against racial injustice isn't over. Too many people are still profiled, excluded, judged, and too many institutions still pretend not to see. So let this story stay with you. Let it stir you. Let it open doors inside you. Because the next time someone gets told, "You don't belong here," maybe you'll be the one who says yes. They do, and they always have. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your voice can carry this message farther than any first-class seat ever could. And stay with us. More stories like this are coming. Stories of courage, of dignity, of justice. We're just getting started.